Ever since Season of the Plunder introduced Arc 3.0 to the game for Titans, people instantly went to Hoyle Heart of Inmost Light. But people, after using the exotic for many seasons in a row that introduced the Light 3.0 subclasses in Witch Queen, it got boring for a lot of people really fast, which is very understandable in my opinion. So for this video, I have 3 Arc Titan builds for you. One for veterans who might want to try something new and maybe that they've never seen before, and 2 builds that experienced players have probably seen in the past, but new lights probably have not seen them. So for the first build, it will be more in depth compared to the other 2. This is because this build is probably new and not a lot of people have probably seen it. And the other 2 builds, a lot of people have seen. Probably 80% of the Destiny community has probably already seen the other 2 builds. So I'm just going to briefly go over them in the mods and the gameplay, just so we can help the new players to this game so they can see the meta builds that they could use. Again, thank you for the recent support, guys. You guys are amazing and I can't wait to keep growing with you guys. And obviously with these builds, these 3 builds I'm going to be going through today, you can really change whatever mods you like, and because if this build doesn't feel good to you or something doesn't feel right, you can just change it. Alright, let's get into the first build. For the exotic we're using for the first build is we're using Synthoceps with Arc 3.0 Titan. If you don't know what Synthoceps does, is when you're surrounded by enemies, you have improved super and melee damage, and you get increased melee lunge range. With that, let's explain really what you're going to be doing with this whole build. Really, with this whole build, you're going to be literally punching with everything. You're going to be punching with your normal fist and with your charge melee. This to me is just a really fun build to use, especially if you just want to literally just full on punch. You can literally just only punch in this build if you want to. Obviously it's more beneficial if you use other abilities with it just to get that melee charged up a lot faster, but you could literally only punch with this build if you wanted to. Instead of the Synthoceps exotic, you could probably use Skullfort. What Skullfort does is when you get melee kills, it instantly recharges your melee ability and it instantly triggers your health regeneration. This is really good. The only reason I'm not really using it is because Synthoceps gives you more damage to your melee, and I just feel like that's really nice, especially if you're only going to be punching. But again, if you're playing lower tier content, I would probably say a Skullfort is probably better for this build in general. So for this next exotic, there is a spoiler warning to it, so if you do not want to hear the spoiler, please skip to this time on screen now. So if you're like me and you always want the spoilers, in Season of the Deep next season, there will be several buffs to several armor exotics that Bungie has not confirmed yet, so we don't know if this is actually true or not, or if the description of the exotic is going to be really changed completely in the way they described it. Point contact cannon brace is awful right now, probably one of the worst exotics in the game, honestly, even throughout all 3 classes. But with the leak, it states point contact cannon brace is going to jolt enemies, is getting a significant damage buff in PvE, and changes so that being amplified increases damage rather than range. To me, this sounds amazing, honestly. And this exotic actually is not bad. The only downside to it right now is the damage is awful and it does not do anything. But the gain melee energy is actually really nice, especially if you get a melee kill with it. It is a hefty amount, especially if you have Kickstart as well on it. You can get like probably 80% of your melee back just with 1 melee. And this being able to jolt would be amazing, especially with the Fragment, Spark of Shock. So then you have 2 abilities that can both jolt. That would be amazing. But until that point, I'm probably going to use Synthoceps. But when that does get buffed, or even if it does at all get buffed, I will use point contact cannon brace. Alright, let's get into the mods of this build. So for the mods, really I just want to do all into melee. So for the helmet, we have a stat mod for all 5. I got the heavy ammo finder. I got hands on, just to give me more super energy from each melee kill. And harmonic siphon. We have heavy handed. This works for both our charge melee and if you have knockout procced, every kill that you get with your normal melee will give you an orb. So this is really good just for ability regen in general and just getting melee back faster and your other abilities faster. Momentum transfer. Basically what this does is causing damage with a grenade reduces your melee cooldown. This will just help feed back your melee to get recharged. Got melee kickstart. So whenever you expend your melee energy, it will bump up a little bit if you don't have any stacks, and depending on how many stacks you have, it will consume all of them and we'll put all that into the melee. For the chest piece, you just do resistance mods. I have charged up just to get another stack, so then I can have 4 stacks, so then that all feeds into my melee kickstart. For the boots, I have stacks and stacks, just so whenever I pick an orb up, it gives me 2 stacks instead of just 1. I have innervation, just so when I pick up an orb, it gives me more grenade energy to feed back into my melee. I got Invigoration just to give me more melee energy every time I pick up an orb, which will be a lot. For the class item, we have Outreach, Bomber, and Reaper. So for this build, we're going to be using Thruster. So we're going to get our class ability a lot. So in using the Thruster, it will reduce my melee cooldown, along with my grenade cooldown with Bomber. And then whenever I use my Thruster and get a kill with a weapon, it gives me Reaper. For the stats of this build, you want to do 100 Resil, 100 Strength if possible, just to get your melee up as fast as possible, and as much discipline as you can. I have 90. I wish I could get 100, but I sadly cannot with the armor I have. For abilities, I have Thunder Crash as a super. Thunder Crash is better in my opinion than Fist of Havoc. But Bungie just stated actually today, this is currently time of recording is Thursday, May the 4th. And Bungie put out a TWAB that listed a lot of Roman supers getting a buff. A significant buff. And even getting some key verbs into their supers. And Fist of Havoc is one of them, and every time you do a heavy attack, a heavy slam it will blind everything inside the dome that it makes, and the heavy attack will do more damage. Like we said before, for the class ability, we're using Thruster. You can really use whatever you want, but I just use Thruster just to get my abilities back faster because it is a lower cooldown than all three. We're using Catapult Lift. It's just your preference. I just like Catapult a lot. Using Thunderclap. This is just so we can charge up the melee if we want it, especially if it's a higher level enemy. We need a lot more power to kill them, so that's why I have that. And it can kill many enemies in one melee. For this build, I'm going to use the Pulse Grenade. The only reason I'm using this is because I want to get the most ability regen from the Ionic Traces from our aspect that we will touch on to right now, or in a second. Another grenade you could probably use is the Storm Grenade. They did nerf it a lot, but I still think it's pretty good, especially because it tracks still. I still think it's really good. But all these are really decent picks, honestly. Like Flashbang Grenade. This stuns unstoppable champions. Escape Grenade's actually not bad, especially for hunters. I'll probably make a build on that once we get to hunters. Arc Bolt is okay. I think it's better on hunters as well. So for the two aspects, we're using Knockout and Touch of Thunder. What Knockout is, when you're critically wounding a target or breaking their shield, infuses your melee attacks with arc energy, increases your melee range and damage for a short time. Defeating targets with melee attacks start health regeneration and makes you amplified. With this is like the main cup of tea of the build. So basically, whenever you critically wound a target or breaking the shield, when you're melee or you see you have knockout on the left side of your screen, you get a kill with that. Obviously, it regens your health. If you do get damage though, it will stop the health regeneration, which is kind of annoying. But if you just keep getting kills over and over again, that will not matter. Also from this, it counts as a powered melee or like a charge melee. So this will also, like I said before, it will give you orbs every time you get a knockout kill. So that's the reason why I'm using this, and you get melee range and damage. So it's really nice, especially with Synthoceps. It increases the damage over and over again. For Touch of Thunder, the one we're looking at is Pulse Grenades. So what this aspect does is it enhances grenades depending on which one it says. So we have Flashbang Grenade, Pulse Grenade, Lightning Grenade, and Storm Grenade. For this build, we're using Pulse Grenade, like we said earlier. And what this does is when it creates Ionic Traces periodically as it damages targets and increases in damage over time. This, in my opinion, is really good. I really miss the Storm Grenade being meta because it was actually fun to use, and it was really satisfying to watch it roam the battlefield and just kill everything with Jolt. But Pulse Grenades just is a really good second pick, especially because now it does more damage than the Storm Grenade. But the only drawback is that it can't move like the Storm Grenade did. But this Pulse Grenade also gives Ionic Traces, which is really good. And it will feed into our abilities and our melee and our grenade, which is awesome. For fragments of this build, we're going to be using Spark of Resistance. This, when you're surrounded by combatants, I think it's 2 or 3. You're resistant to incoming damage. I think they reduced this coming Lightfall. So I don't think it's as strong as it was before, but I still like it just for high level content, and you're always going to be surrounded no matter what, especially with this build. Spark of Ions, defeating a Jolt target creates an Ionic Trace. This is good because your grenade will jolt enemies, and those enemies killed by that jolt will give you an Ionic Trace. But there is a cooldown. Not sure exactly what it is. I'll probably put it on the screen though, just for you guys so you guys know. But you also will see on the left side of your screen when you're using this. Spark of Feedback, taking melee damage briefly increases your outgoing melee damage. This is really good because especially if you're going to be close quarters with enemies and they melee you, you can do a ton more damage, especially with Knockout and Synthoceps, and this proc all at once, you can do a lot of damage. Spark of Shock, your arc grenades jolt targets. This is really what we're building on right here. For the weapons of this build, you really can use anything you really want. The only reason I'm using Ikilos is because of Volt Shot, and there's a lot of other guns with Volt Shot. I'm just using Ikilos because it feels good. The reason I'm using Volt Shot is just so I can get my ionic traces from Spark of Ions, so my weapons also feed into my abilities. Again, you can really use whatever weapons you want. So for the gameplay of this loop, really all you want to do is when you go into combat, you want to get a melee kill with your powered melee. You want to throw your grenade then. This will give you melee energy, and from your melee, you pick up the orbs that you get. That will feed into your armor charge, which will also give you melee kickstart. And then once you get your melee back, you can just feed it over and over again. You'll get more melee because of the kickstart now, and you can just keep power meleeing with your normal melee with knockout, and you will keep getting orbs, and this will feed into all your abilities. When other exotics get buffed, I will change this build probably and tweak it a little bit, and I'll probably make a video in the future. And with the super changes on all 3 subclasses and all 3 classes in general, I'll probably make builds on those supers along with that, and probably change some stuff that I've made builds on before just because of these changes. Alright, moving on to the second build. This build takes advantage of Heart Inmost Light. Honestly, I really think Heart Inmost Light is probably the strongest on this build, just because with the ionic traces and everything else that's really feeding into it. I think it's the strongest, and you can just get your abilities so much faster than every other subclass. So for the mods of this build, we have stat mods obviously for all 5. For the helmet, we have Ash's Ass, that's 2 of them. This is so we're going to get a lot of grenade kills with this, and we want to get our super as fast as possible, so we want to use Ash's Assets as much as possible. Also, we have Arc Siphon, just to get more orbs off of our arc weapons. Onto the gauntlets, we have Bolstering Detonation. What this does is when we throw a grenade, it will feed back into our class ability, and so we can keep feeding the other abilities. Then we have Grenade Kickstart, so every time we pick up an orb, it will give us armor charge, and this will feed into our grenade when we throw it or expend it. We got Firepower, so every time we throw a grenade, it creates an orb of power. This is fixed now. It was bugged when I made the Void build, my last video, but now it's fixed, so it should work now. Onto the chest piece. We have charged up just so we get another armor charge, so we can hold 4 instead of 3 to also feed into the grenade kickstart. Then we have Concussive Dampener. This is just for resistance mods. You can really use whatever you want there. For the boots, we have Recuperation. This is just so we have health regeneration, because what Arc really suffers from is the health regen. There's not a lot of health regen in Arc in general, except for Knockout and Hunter Arc. This will just help our health regen, just so we can get our health back as much as possible, and so we don't die. Innervation, just to get our grenade back faster when we pick up orbs. And then Stacks and Stacks, just so whenever we pick up an orb, it will give us 2 armor charges to feed into the grenade kickstart. For the class item, we have 1 Bomber, 1 Outreach, and then we have Reaper. Bomber just to recharge a grenade faster. Reaper just to get an orb after using our class ability and getting a kill. And Outreach just to reduce our melee cooldown when we use that class ability. For the stats of this build, you really don't need a lot of the strength that we had like the last build. Really what I would use is Resilience and Discipline for the main 2. And then I would probably feed in Recovery and then some Strength. I think this one right here is a good stat distribution. Just go, you have 70 Recovery just so if you need it, you can have it. And also 50 Strength. You could probably switch these out. You can get 70 Strength instead of, and then 50 Recovery, just so you get faster Strength recharge. For our subclass, obviously we're using Thunder Crash again. We have Thruster, just because obviously this is the lowest recharge rate, and it is nice to have, especially with this build, because you're always going to be moving, so this is always nice. Catapult Lift, up to you, whatever you want to use. Thunderclap, I just use this just to use it instantly, because with the other 2s you have to run a little bit or have a little setup going, and this you can just really just use it instantly. Pulse Grenade, this will just help the build in general and just jolt everything around, which we'll get into very soon. And this will also make us Ionic Traces and will do more damage over time. So there's a lot going in this grenade, and I really enjoy it. You could also sub out this grenade for a Storm Grenade like we said before, but again, they did nerf this grenade a lot, and so for now, I think for this build, we're going to be using Pulse Grenade, especially because now they nerfed Heart Inmost Light, so the ability region is not fully there. For aspects, we have Knockout and Touch of Thunder. Knockout just to give us more melee range and damage and health off of melee kills. This is just to help, so if you're about to die, you can just get a melee kill real quick and regen all your health. This is really what you're going to be using for this build. And also, I think it also procs your Heart of Most Light, so then you can just feed your ability again. Touch of Thunder. Again, this is just enhancing your grenades that it says in the description. So flashbang grenade, pulse grenade, lightning grenade, storm grenade. Two I would mainly focus on is pulse grenade. Creates ionic traces periodically as it damages over time. Increases the damage also. For Storm Grenade, it basically turns the normal Storm Grenade, which is stationary, into a roaming thundercloud, which tracks nearby enemies, and with the fragment we will get into it later on, it will also jolt targets. Again, we're going to be using this Pulse Grenade just for the ionic traces for more ability regen and also the more damage. For the fragments, we have Spark of Magnitude. Your lingering arc grenades, lightning grenades, storm grenade, pulse grenade have extended duration. This, in my opinion, is really nice. It gives the pulse grenade an extra pulse of damage, and the storm grenade also another lightning strike, along with the lightning grenade. Spark of Amplitude. This fragment beforehand in Witch Queen, when this subclass first came out, was not popular at all, especially because orbs of power weren't really that important, especially towards builds. But now with the new system and orbs being the main source, probably defeating targets while you are amplified creates an orb of power is just really strong now, and it's literally with anything. It could be your abilities, and with Jolt, it's really nice with Jolt because you're going to be getting multiple kills in general, so this is really good now. Spark of Ions. Defeating a jolted target creates an ionic trace. This is also really nice. There's a cooldown like I said before, but this will help your ability regen. And also, if you're using a volt shot weapon, this will also tie into that. So if you get a jolted kill with the volt shot weapon, it will send an ionic trace towards you. Spark of Shock is our last fragment. Your arc grenades jolt targets. This is also really good just to tie into the ions like we said before, and also to give us an orb of power. This is just great at clear in general and boss DPS. For the weapons, you can really use whatever weapons you really want with this build. I probably recommend a volt shot weapon. You don't need to have it, but it's just nice just so to feed your abilities more often. But yeah, other than that, it does not matter what weapons you use. You can use whatever weapons you really like. So for the gameplay loop of this build, basically you're just going to be using all your abilities constantly. So probably what I would do is use a grenade first, and then melee, and then class ability. And by that time, you're just going to get a couple kills, maybe with your SMG, get some jolted kills, get some ionic traces, and then get your grenade back, throw your grenade again, melee, dodge with your thruster. And this will just keep the cycle going, especially if you keep getting kills with jolted. Traces will be coming to you constantly. This build is really good in my opinion. I know Heart of Most Light is kind of boring for a lot of people, but this build is just really good for ad clear in general, and I still really enjoy using it. So this third and last build for the exotic, we have Cuirass of the Falling Star. What this does is it increases your Thunder Crash damage and also gives you an overshield the farther you travel before striking a target. This has been meta for so many years now, and it's still pretty good. It does a flat 400,000 DPS to a boss if you hit him directly with the Thunder Crash with this on. A lot of people in raids really use the Heart of Most Light or whatever exotic they want to use for arc, and then they just hot swap to this exotic. With this build, I just wanted to try and get as much ability regen as possible, especially if you always forget in raids to switch from your Hoyle, Heart of Most Light, to your Cuirass coming boss damage, because I do forget sometimes also. I try to make this build have as much ability regen as possible. So for the mods of this build, so obviously we have a stat mod for all 5. First mod, we have Ashes of Assets. What this does is when you get a grenade kill, it will regen your super faster. Also, we have Arc Siphon, just so when we get Arc Weapon Final Blows, it creates an orb. Also, we have Dynamo. When we use our thruster or whatever barricade or whatever subclass or class ability you're using near targets, it will give you super energy. For the gauntlets, we have momentum transfer. Causing damage with the grenade reduces your melee cooldown. This also, like the other 2 builds, this is really nice. Just so when you throw your grenade, you can get your melee cooldown just to have all your abilities up at the same time. We have grenade kickstart, so whenever we pick up one orb, feed into the kickstart and give us more grenade energy when we expend the grenade. Firepower, when we get a grenade kill, it creates an overpower. This is also really good to feed back into kickstart, so when we use our grenade, it will pick up or drop an orb, we pick up the orb, it will feed us back into kickstart. There's a gameplay loop right there. For the chest piece, we have just resistance mods, and we've charged up so we can get 4 armor charges instead of 3, which also feeds into our grenade kickstart. For the legs, we got stacks and stacks, just so whenever we pick an orb up, it gives us 2 armor charges instead of just 1. Also, we have recuperation. again like the last build, just so we get more health regen, because there's not a lot of health regen on this build except for knockout. So we have innervation, so whenever we pick up an orb, it will give us more grenade energy. For the class item, we got Bomber, Outreach, and Raper. For Bomber, we have reduced grenade cooldown when using your class ability, along with Outreach, which is reduced melee cooldown when using your class ability. And then when you're using your class ability and get a kill, Reaper will proc and will give you 1 orb, which will feed back into your grenade kickstart. For stats of this build, you want to use 100 Rezo and 100 discipline. I'll probably get as much recovery as possible, just so you can get that health regen, and also as much strength as possible, so you can get your ability cooldowns as fast as possible as well. So for the subclass and the abilities, we're using Thunder Crash. This is mandatory for the build, especially because it will tie into our Cuirass of the Fallen Star to give us more damage for boss DPS and just other DPS in general. For the class ability, we're using the Thruster. You can really use whatever you want. So like for high level content like a raid or something like that, you can obviously switch Tower and Barricade. I just have Thruster, just so if I'm doing like a strike or whatever, I can just have this on and get more ability energy because it's less time than the other two. I'm using Catapult Lift. You can use whatever one you want. I'm using Thunderclap just so I can get the range melee, which is always nice in high level content, and so you can get the health regen from that. And also you can just use it instantly, which is always nice. Pulse Grenade. This also just gives us Ionic Traces. It jolts and it does more damage over time from our aspect that we get into in a second. Another grenade I'll probably recommend is the Storm Grenade, and also honestly the Flashbang Grenade, especially if you're going to be in high level content. Flashbang Grenade, if you have unstoppable champions, it'll be very nice to deal with the unstoppable champions with this grenade. For our aspects, we got Knockout and Touch of Thunder. Knockout just helps with our melee Thunderclap, just gives health regen and more range and damage with our melee. Touch of Thunder, what this does is it just improves our grenades, the Flashbang Grenade, Pulse Grenade, Lightning Grenade, and Storm Grenade. Two of again we're looking at our Pulse Grenade and Storm Grenade. Really, you can use whatever one you want, but I use the Pulse Grenade just for the Ionic Traces like we have in the last 2 builds. And also it does more damage over time, and it's going to be good for stationary bosses and just so you can jolt the target. For the fragments, we have Spark Resistance, just while you're surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. It did get nerfed though recently, but it's not a hefty nerf, but it is a nerf. Spark Amplitude again, just so when you're rapidly defeating targets while you're amplified, creates enough power. This just feeds back into our whole build with the grenades and the abilities, energies, and all that. Spark Ions, what this does is defeating a jolted target, creates an Ionic Trace. This Ionic Trace comes to you, grants you more ability energy for all 3 of your abilities, and just helps with the overall cycle of the build. Spark of Shock, here are grenade jolt targets. This is the best fragment out of all 4 of them, especially in each build I've mentioned before, and this is honestly, in my opinion, mandatory because it is so good. For weapons, like we said in the last 2 builds, you can really use any weapon you really want, especially because this will be a raid build or whatever build you want to put this into. You can use like Galahorn if you want to. You can use Hothead. For primary, you could use, like I said before, Aikilos with Volt Shot, or you can use Iterative Loop, which is the new fusion rifle, Neomuna fusion rifle. It is craftable and it does have Volt Shot in it, and a lot of people have used it, especially for solo, flawless, Root of Nightmares raid. They've used that for the 3rd encounter, which is really nice. And you can obviously use Witherhoard, Conditional Finality, it's not burden. You use whatever you want for weapons. So for the gameplay loop of this build, really it's just using the abilities as much as possible, any ability you really want to use, and then obviously using your super when you need to with the Cuirass of the Fallen Star just to get more damage and the overshield. Honestly, you can also pop the super if you need to, if you're about to die, and if you're in a situation where you shouldn't be dying, especially in a raid, you don't have a lot of reses left and you really need just to pop because you're about to die and you're surrounded. You can pop real quick and get that overshield, even though you will be wasting the super, but it will keep you alive. Again, this build I'll probably be using in a raid or just high level content just to get more damage within the exotic. So that's it for the 3 builds. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope this helped you understand the builds kind of a little bit more, and just so you have more ideas that you could maybe implement into your own builds. Again, when more exotics get buffed, like we said in the spoiler before that I'm not going to say, especially if you skipped it, but if that exotic gets buffed, I will make another video on it. Also, if you didn't know, Guardian Games is happening right now, and it just started this first Tuesday, and in this event there is more weapon XP. So if you have any weapons that you need to level up, make sure to go level up right now. And for the next videos, I will have multiple builds if needed into the video, like this one. Especially if there's a build that everyone has seen or used before, I will just include it like I did for the Inmost Light and just briefly go over it and why it's good and the gameplay loop of it. You guys will see what I mean in the later videos, but I just want to mention that just so each video has a new topic that I will be going over, like this build with the Synthoceps and just the melee build in general, just so there's more in stock for you guys while you're watching the videos. And also to help the new players that have really not seen the new or the old meta builds that are still that people use today. If you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more builds, I'll be working on Warlock next. And I'm very excited for this because I love Warlock builds in general. So I'm very excited for this. If you guys enjoyed this video, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. Again, thank you for all the support. You guys are amazing and I can't wait to keep going and keep making builds for you guys. The dim link for all 3 of these builds will be in the video description, along with my TikTok will be in the description. And yeah, thank you for taking your time to watch this video, and hopefully you guys learned something. I'll see you guys later with another build.